Doom and Wolfenstein are two peas in the same pod. They're both first-person shooters that revolutionized the genre. They both feature a large variety of weapons, enemies, and violent deaths, and they both have a little face at the bottom that smiles when you pick up a new gun. But the connections go much deeper than that. Not only is the gameplay extremely similar, but they sometimes share the same sprites, textures, and even sounds. And it wasn't just that Doom took such inspiration from Wolfenstein, but the other way around as well. So please, join me as we take a look at all those shared assets. Not just of the original DOS games, but also of course to other systems and even entire spin-offs. I guarantee that there will be at least one thing that you haven't heard of yet. Let's just get this out of the way because it's almost definitely what you've been thinking about already. The secret Wolfenstein levels from Doom 2. The wall textures are slightly tweaked versions of the higher resolution ones from the Jagged Mag ports of Wolfenstein, also called the Mag family. Most of them are exactly the same, though the cyan colors are now white and grey, probably because Doom uses a different palette. The eagle on the banners is now red instead of purple, most likely because of the palette as well. The golden wreath texture is actually completely unique to Doom 2 as it didn't exist in the Mag family games. There was a similar one which they seem to have taken as a base and heavily modified, even adding some bits of laurel from yet another texture. The sprites on the SS are the exact same ones from Wolfenstein for DOS. And if you look very closely, you can even still see some magenta colored pixels on the background layer between the legs. Their jib animations are entirely new, however, simply taking the zombie-man sprites and turning them blue. Their voice lines are also not the same ones, they were instead re-recorded just for Doom 2 and actually sound a lot nicer.
Schusswaffel! 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 Mein Leben! Mein Leben! Mein Leben! Mein Leben!
On the topic of audio, the music tracks in the levels are remixes of... On the topic of audio, the music tracks in the levels are remixes of The Ultimate Challenge from Wolfenstein 3D, and Evil Incarnate from its prequel, Spear of Destiny. And the latter is quite ironic because it originally plays in the final level of that game, in which you, drumroll please, go to hell. By the way, a fun little fact, the first secret in map 31 in the quote dog candle with all the pinky demons is actually not from Wolfenstein for DOS, but was first introduced in the Super Nintendo port. Now let's take a look at the less obvious graphics. The grey stone and rock floor textures were ripped one-to-one from Spear of Destiny, not even changing the palette or anything. Similarly, the orange sandstone walls were taken directly from the Mag family of Wolfenstein. As pointed out by Scuba Steve, this same texture was reused later in the first Quake, so it seems the guys at id were quite fond of it. And another one as well. Seems I gotta make a video about Quake's textures too. Anyway, the red and beige bricks which can be found all over Doom 2 city levels also come from Wolfenstein 3D, though the shading was made a bit smoother and less pixelated. Now here's the texture that's almost unrecognizable from the original, namely the dark grey cobblestone walls and floors. Here, they seem to have only used the Wolfenstein one as a basis and completely redid the lighting, shading, and even the shapes of the stones themselves, as well as creating a better look for the top and bottom. I'll be honest, if I hadn't played these games so much, I don't think I'd have ever noticed the similarities, because they appear as two entirely different graphics. Considering how much detail was added for the Doom variant, it makes me wonder if they're both based off of real-world photographs, which wasn't all that uncommon back then. Certainly makes for a very iconic texture, and one of my favorites in fact. Now, during Doom's early development, they simply copied Lotos sprites as placeholders, just so they could get a feel for what the game could look like. Most of these appear only in the earliest versions from 0.3 to 0.5, like water puddles, recolored flags, medkits, and even the green barrels. Interestingly, they had already made the decision to ditch the full shadows on the sprites, likely because Doom was supposed to have actual lights and shadows within the levels themselves. The barrels are also interesting since for 0.4, they attempted to draw some unique sprites from scratch, which honestly look worse than even the placeholders. I think the id guys realized this as well, since the final barrels are based on the Wolfenstein once again, just heavily redrawn. The ammo pack and blood chalice of 0.4 are also tweaked versions of existing pickups. You can tell that the shading is a lot nicer here, and actually makes me a bit sad that they were never used. I could see the chalice at least being part of level decoration. Even earlier than any of those are the HUD sprites of the weapons, which were all unceremoniously and quite poorly copied and pasted from Wolfenstein. However, they seem to have only used the machine gun graphic, which was then modified into every other weapon. Even the pistols don't look like they're based on their Wolfenstein counterpart with a different grip and barrel. The knife sprite also looks more like a lazy though original drawing, which I also don't really get. If these are placeholders, then why not just copy all of them? Interestingly, even the weapon pickups that appear in version 0.3 and later are still based on the HUD graphics and not the actual Wolfenstein pickups. I suppose because those sprites were simply too small next to Doom's other sprites and honestly, don't look great. I'm kinda sad that these were also scrapped, as they look pretty snazzy. There have been many recreations of them over the years, but one I really enjoy comes from Shallow, who reinterpreted one of them as a rocket launcher with a spinning barrel. Makes Doom's final weapons seem almost quaint in comparison. And speaking of Doom's final sprites, I always thought that I recognized the Spider Mastermind's chain gun from somewhere. As you might know from the Xenos videos, the original real-world Models gun was way too small to see in game, so they had to redo it. And once again, with a lot of enemies that wield massive chain guns, Wolfenstein 3D of course. Though in this case, the gun in question was taken from the Death Knight from Spear of Destiny and had its color and shading slightly adjusted. As pointed out by Perdition's Gate Enjoyer on the Spriters-Resource, some of the lamps during Doom's early development might have also been inspired by Wolfenstein's lamps, but that's unconfirmed. What is confirmed, however, is the fact that when Bobby Prince hadn't yet finished the sound effects for the game, they used the ones from the Super Nintendo port of Wolfenstein as placeholders, making for a delightfully cheesy gameplay experience.
Right there, oh. Right in the face.
And those were both of the original two Doom games. However, decades later, Doom would once again make use of Wolfenstein's graphics. The mobile game Doom RPG has enemies called Hellhounds, which are, unsurprisingly, recolors of the dogs from the Mag family. Doom 2 RPG also introduced someone named Caldex, who isn't much to look at in the original version, but in the iOS one, which upscaled all character sprites, he received the face of BJ from Wolfenstein RPG. And since we're on the topic of that game, the final boss of it is the Harbinger of Doom, who... yeah, it's the Cyber Demon, just minus the cyber part, though he loses the same limbs which get replaced by cybernetic implants later. And as if his name and appearance didn't make it obvious enough, as he gets sucked into presumably hell upon dying, he curses you and says that, quote, your descendants will pay. Good job BJ, you set Doom Guy up for eternal torment. Another Wolfenstein game that took direct inspiration from Doom is the SNES port, which not only used the concept of the backpack item, but also copied its sprite. Even the rocket launcher and flamethrower that were added to the board functioned very similarly to the rocket launcher and plasma rifle from Doom. It also added the mechanic of BJ turning his head depending on which direction he was attacked from, which did not exist in the DOS original and was later reused in the other ports as well. Speaking of those games, the bosses Hansgroße, Transgroße, and the Death Knight received higher res sprites in the Mag family games, whose faces look eerily similar to Doom guys, especially the latter two. I have no confirmation for this of course, and Angry Man with Buzzcut isn't exactly a concept Doom invented, but still, maybe they were at least inspired by him. However, some of the weapons are undeniably from Doom, specifically the Jaguar port. The pistol, chain gun, and rocket launcher were taken straight from that game and were only mildly altered, such as lazily cutting off bits of the pistol's muzzle. It's even more hilarious when it comes to the flames and explosions, which are pretty much every single explosion sprite from Doom meshed together until they look like fireworks. And finally, a couple decades later, Machine Games would release Wolfenstein: The New Colossus, which has a Wolfenstein arcade game that is based on the DOS original, but reverses the roles. Now you are a P-baby going up against BJ Blazkowicz himself. In the secret Pac-Man level, the ghosts were replaced with references to other id games like Commander Keen characters, as well as a Kako Demon. And those were all the graphics and sounds from Wolfenstein that ended up in Doom and vice versa. There are more inspirations of course, as some gameplay elements of Wolf 3D initially made it into Doom, like its Gone Life system. And even the wizard in Return to Castle Wolfenstein's intro cutscene makes a pained Doom guy grunt. However, considering how closely knit all of its games are, we'd be here all day if we listed every single connection between them. But I think that's why I love them so much, because they really do feel like they're all part of the same family. They didn't wipe the slate clean with every new title, it really was a continuous evolution. No matter how much forward or backward you travel, they always have little bits and pieces of each other in them. Some sprites here, some sounds there, or even entire concepts. As if every single game was able to learn from the others, and there certainly was a lot to learn. So all of these things really add a lot of character, and I haven't seen any games do something like that since, with the exception of Valve's games and I suppose Serious Sam and the Talos Principle. And on a larger level, it even sort of implies that all of these titles of all of these different franchises are all part of the same universe. Sure, a shared rock wall texture doesn't mean that BJ is the great-great-grandfather of Doom Guy and Quake Guy, but if there's some visual similarities, maybe there's also some narrative ones. Anyway, do let me know what you think. Did I miss anything perhaps? I also know that Heretic, Hexen, Strife, and many other Doom Engine games also reused assets from it, so perhaps I'm going to make a part 2 to this video if there's enough demand for it. And if you've enjoyed the video and want to support me further, then you can do that by dropping a like, subscribing to my channel, and even by donating directly to my Patreon. Anything is appreciated. But for now, thank you very much for watching, have a wonderful day, and goodbye.